Welcome to the Hobby Hangout. You can see the Orc Shaman here already primed and ready to go. I had hit him with the AK Russian Green Spray, followed by a zenithal highlight of Vallejo Sun Yellow. My hope was that this bright yellow base will really help make our final greens pop. I'm David, and we're painting this Shaman from Massive Darkness as part of an Orktober challenge from a mini painting Discord channel. Now, I usually avoid orcs to be honest, and I've always found painting green skin seriously tough, so this is my chance to help level up my painting skill and get out of my comfort zone. So let's get into it. I started with a mix of Vallejo Luftwaffe Camouflage Green with AK Glaze Medium. This combination gives me plenty of working time and a transparent color to start. And I applied this all over the skin areas, making sure to hit the darker recesses. With the first coat complete, I'm moving on to the highlights. I'm mixing in AK Interactive Dark Green into the base Vallejo Luftwaffe Camo Green glaze that I started with. I'm applying this color to a large area, about 90% of the skin, and leaving the darker initial glaze mix in the deepest recesses. This will allow us to start building a smooth transition as we build out the muscle structure of the Shaman. Next, as we continue to define the highlights, I made a glaze of only the AK Interactive Dark Green. By switching to just the brighter color, we can continue to slowly build up these layers on the raised areas of the skin. This is where you want to take your time, focusing on catching the muscle structure, hitting the tops of the shoulders and the raised parts of the forearms. I also took special care applying the glaze to the face, ensuring we build a really nice, smooth transition here. The face is going to be one of the focal points, and we want to make sure it looks battle ready and vibrant. For the next level of highlights, I'm adding Frog Green from AK into our dark green glaze mix. This brightens things up significantly and really moves us toward the final look that I'm going for. With each of these successive highlight layers, I'm intentionally covering less and less of the skin. This controlled process is vital for accurately defining the orc muscle structure and building up that volumetric highlight. At this stage, it's still really important to ensure all those different muscle groups are actually connected with this layer of the highlight, maintaining a smooth transition across the entire model and avoiding any harsh lines. And we're getting closer and closer to that green skin. Now for a pure frog green glaze. Using a fine tipped brush, we can start to really pick out the highest edges, especially on the face. This is crucial for building maximum contrast and making that focal point pop. Overall, I'm focusing on covering only about 20 to 30% of the skin, hitting just the most raised portions of the muscles. Think of it as painting the light directly onto the model. When these tiny, sharp highlights are applied, the muscle structure defined in the earlier steps really starts to look realistic and punchy. Time to try something totally new. So I picked up some AK Fluorescent Yellow to give it a test run. I've never actually used fluorescent colors before, but I know they are a secret weapon to help raise the green and make the entire miniature look incredibly vibrant. I mixed that fluorescent yellow right into our existing frog green glaze, and I'm using this new super bright mix to carefully pick out the highest edges of the muscles. This layer is minimal, but it should have a fairly huge effect, and I'll follow up with it on a pure fluorescent yellow glaze afterwards. For the stomach, I used Old Rose and mixed it with the frog green glaze, and throughout the paint job I would revisit the stomach and slowly highlight it up to the Old Rose color. Taking a break from the skin, let's bring some expression to the face by tackling the eyes. First, I used an off-white to carefully block out the whites of the eyes. This is a bit fiddly, but take your time and make sure you have a nice sharp point to your brush. Next, using a dark gray, almost black, I very carefully painted in the pupils of the Orc Shaman. Getting those eyes right will add personality and focus on all the great work that you did on the skin. Now let's move to the mouth and give those lips some definition. For the base coat, I went with a mix of Old Rose with our frog green glaze. This creates a slightly desaturated fleshy color that does transition nicely from the green of the skin. Then I worked on highlighting it up, blending it in ivory with the Old Rose mix. The key is applying this brighter mix only to the raised edges of the lips. This contrast between the pinks and the green skin really helps sell the texture and brings another level to the shaman's face. Now for the cape. I decided to go with a strong, rich red for maximum contrast. I started with a solid base coat of burnt red. Then I leaned hard into those new pigments. I built up the highlights using a mix of burnt red and fluorescent orange, gradually working my way up to a pure highlight of fluorescent orange. We're putting those new fluorescent paints to work and making the shaman look truly powerful. Moving on to some smaller parts on the shaman, let's look at the leather cap and the beard. For the cap, I used AK burnt umber. I mixed in some off-white to pick out some of the scratchy highlights, giving the leather a worn texture. I then hit it with a final burnt umber glaze that tones down the highlights just perfectly, giving it a rich, used look. For the beard, I base coated it black. To highlight, I slowly mixed that black with off-white and picked out only minimal spectral highlights. I was careful here, we want it to look like shiny black hair and not gray hair. Time to paint the texture of the fur on the cloak. Since this isn't the main focal point of the model, we want to be efficient and not get too crazy here. I started by laying down a base coat of medium sand from AK. This light neutral color works perfectly with a wash to instantly bring out the fur's detail. Next, I applied an AK grime wash, making sure to brush this right into all those recesses. Now I'm going to let the wash fully dry while I move on to the armor. I'll come back to the fur afterwards and finish it off with some dry brushing. I quickly moved on to the armor. For a nice dark base, I applied gunmetal from AK to all the metal plates. A solid coat is all we need right now, and we'll come back to weather it later. Alright, let's hit those tattoos on the shaman's arm. I wanted to give this orc some bright, vibrant blue war paint, just like the savage orcs I remember from Warhammer Fantasy. So I started with a foundation layer of strong dark blue from AK. This gives us a deep color base right where we want the symbol to be. Now, to truly bring the color up. Next, I applied star blue from AK over the raised areas of the strong dark blue. This initial highlight layer is what really defines the edges of the symbol. Then, I brought out the fluorescent paints again. I mixed the star blue with a touch of fluorescent blue for my second highlight layer, focusing this mix on smaller, brighter areas. Finally, I did a final highlight of pure fluorescent blue right along the top edges and the central points of the tattoo. This last step gives the symbol a fantastic, bright, vibrant color, tying it back to the fluorescence that we've used on the rest of the model. Time for the staff. I'm using green-brown from AK for the base coat of the wood. This rich, earthy tone is perfect for establishing a natural dark color on the shaman's staff. Once this is dry, we can start adding some wood grain detail. To start building some depth on the staff, I applied a wash of GW's Agrax Earth Shade. Once that was dry, I went back with the green-brown to start painting in some subtle wood grain patterns. This will add a lot of character to the staff. Once that was dried, I mixed the green-brown with some ivory for a second thinner highlight. I carefully picked out more of those wood grain and knot patterns with this brighter mix to complete the staff. With the wood grain on the staff complete, let's move on to the bones. I started by giving all the bone areas a solid base coat using mud brown. This darker foundation is perfect for quickly establishing depth and a natural used color before we build up the highlights. I covered all the small skulls on the staff and the bones on the shaman's shoulder. From here, I looked at building up texture. I used ivory to add scratchy highlights, focusing on picking out the edges and details of all the small skulls and bones. That scratchy technique immediately gives the bone a rough, worn look. Next, I applied a final brighter highlight of pure off-white to really hit the highest points and build maximum contrast on the bone texture. Once that 3-layer blend was fully dry, I went over everything with a wash of GW Seraphim Sepia. This step will allow the wash to flow into the recesses and add shadow, but more importantly, it helps to smooth the transitions between those 3 layers and tones down the sharp brightness of the off-white. After applying a black wash from AK over the gunmetal base coat of the armor, which settled nicely into the rivets and recesses, I moved on to the highlights. I used dark aluminum from AK to carefully pick out some spectral highlights on the metal plates. This is a simple step and adds a nice worn metallic gleam to the edges and makes the armor look sharp and battle damaged. So for these next steps of the video, we're actually revisiting the skin. Remember, you should never be afraid to revisit parts of your miniature if you're not happy with them. There's no need to strip the paint off, just continue to use thin coats and adjust until you get where you want to be. I started by applying a thin glaze of dark green from AK. Now, this color has really strong coverage, even when thinned down, but I wanted to build a smoother blend across these transitions. This layer helps me re-establish a solid mid-tone before pushing the highlights again. With the mid-tone re-established, it's time to work back up to those vibrant highlights that really define the form of the orc. I took that previous mix of frog green and dark green and thinned it down to an almost pure glaze consistency. I used this thin mix to redefine the muscle structure and seamlessly blend that into the mid-tone we just put down. This is somewhat painstaking work, but it pays off. I spent extra time carefully picking out the highest points of the face again, making sure all those blends look incredibly smooth and natural. Once that layer was completely dry, I moved up to pure frog green, again keeping it very thin, almost a glaze, and I continued to build and blend those layers. This stage is all about controlling the intensity, restricting the paint to smaller and smaller areas. You should see the skin starting to gain real volume and luminosity now. And now for the finishing touches here on these layers, I brought out a thin glaze of our fluorescent green. I used this final bright layer to pick out the very tops of the muscles and the sharpest edges. This fluorescent punch is what makes the light look so intense. By restricting it to just those tiny points, we can truly define the final muscle shape and bring out the menacing character of the shaman's face as well. Now we still have quite a bit of contrast in the various layers, so we'll start to use a few more glazes to tone these out and blend them together. To push the vibrancy and ensure all those color transitions on the skin were smoother, I came back for one final blending session on the skin. I started by taking a glaze of the original Vallejo Luftwaffe camouflage green and applied this only to the deepest recesses along the shoulders and the elbows and the backs of the arms. This darker foundational color is pulled back out to add that final rich depth and contrast to the shadows, making the highlights we just worked on stand out even more. Next, I returned to one of the key mid-tone mixes and used a glaze of the dark green and frog green. I applied this to the main broader portions of the skin. The key here is to go really slowly and apply multiple thin coats. I'm building up multiple layers of this mid-tone until I'm completely satisfied with how smoothly it transitions into both the deep shadows and the bright highlights. You have to be patient here and ensure the blends are completely seamless. Finally, I finished with a last precise glaze of pure frog green. I reserved this coat for the peaks and the sharpest edges of the muscles, reinforcing the volume and catching the light. By using these three distinct glazes sequentially, we achieve a vibrant look to the shaman skin. And at this point, I was happy with the miniature, and I called it done.